Elijah. Let me acknowledge the Premier, Ntete Mokgoro, my colleague, the MEC of Education in Northwest, the leadership of Platinum Mine that gave us a beautiful school. Thank you very much, CEO. Also acknowledge our DG, Ntete Mueli, and the school leadership, the principal and the staff who have really kept this school in a very good state. I had the privilege to receive the school in my previous term, and it's as I left it. So congratulations to principal. From the outset, I really have to acknowledge the furor that of yesterday's media conference, and for that I sincerely apologize. Due to last-minute changes, and I think the media will be aware that on Saturday we had the CEM, and after the CEM we met with our unions, your governing bodies, but also received our reports, and almost the whole day on Saturday. And the decision that we took on Saturday forced me to use Sunday to do a series of consultations, because on Saturday I take not to receive learners today, but it had major implications for the sector because it was very late by the time that decision was taken. Learners which were on the way to schools, especially from outside provinces, principals were not aware of the decision that we took on Saturday, so I spent almost the whole of Sunday consulting. So as I said, I was forced into a number of consultations with a number of key stakeholders who have a direct interest in basic education, and resulting in challenges for me to continue with the press briefing we had planned. Because I didn't want principals to first hear from the media that they can't receive learners before we speak to them directly. So I had to engage with Association of School Principals. I had to engage with leadership of schools, both private and independent, because they were also using the date, and they are not part of the public system, and they had to be told already by Sunday that there was a decision that we had taken on Saturday. I also had to communicate to get into a meeting for South African Human Rights Commission, because itself also was threatening interdiction, so I had to also spend time with them. I also had to spend time with organizations representing learners with special needs. And I really want to repeat that. I really wish to apologize wholeheartedly for the inconvenience that was caused yesterday. But it was beyond my control, because I had to make sure that all key stakeholders are informed in time so that they can mitigate all the challenges which have been brought by the decision that we took very late on Saturday. So if you recall, on the 19th of May 2020, I announced a phased opening of schools from the 5th of June. Following that announcement, our department convened a number of meetings, weekly basis, and sometimes more than twice a week. I had engaged with heads of provincial education departments to prepare the system for the new environment. I had to engage with teacher unions about the new environment we have to operate under, with your national school governing bodies, with your principals associations, with the different NGOs working in the sector, but also organizations working with learners with special needs. We had to engage with assessment bodies to make sure that indeed with the new there will be necessary changes to our assessment system, and a series of stakeholders with a direct interest in basic education. So we had to consult with everybody else who works with us. As I said, some of these meetings were convened on a weekly basis and some more than once a week. And the main focus of these meetings was to collaborate with our key stakeholders and to put in place measures to ensure the readiness of the system for the phase-in reopening of schools. As indicated earlier, critical to the reopening of schools was and still remains absolute compliance with all health safety requirements pronounced by the Department of Health. So on the 30th of May, which is this past Saturday, we again met as Council of Education Ministers to have our final report, because we've been receiving these weekly reports. And we received 3 critical reports. The first of the State of Readiness report, which we received from the NECT, and I did invite them today to really give you a sense of what were the tools they were using and what were the recommendations that they made after giving us that final report. We also received a report from Rand Water, and I've also invited them to really also come and assure the nation from their reports that we are indeed on the right track, so that our extension of the schools opening, because it's informed by the finalization of the work that they're doing for us, will also be here, so they're here to also speak for themselves. But we also, as a sector, because we also work with provinces or a concurrent structure, I had to meet with my colleagues from provinces and receive reports from different provinces in terms of their state of readiness and their state of unreadiness. So those were the 3 reports that informed our decision late on Saturday. So based on these reports, it became clear that the sector was at different levels of readiness. And as you recall, that we were allowed to open schools only if we meet the health requirements to the. So those reports confirmed in some instances were 80%, in other provinces were 96%, but we were not all at the same level. And in the main, it was this reason that the CM determined that the sector requires more time to mop up its state of readiness for schools reopening. And as I will speak to that about what were the outstanding matters. But I can speak to some of them off the cuff, because on Thursday I visited a number of schools in Gauteng. On Friday I went to the Free State. I went to the first school in Olivenhout, and the principal was and they were doing everything to ready themselves for Monday. Paul whispered to me and said, "You know, Minister, I hear all the time. We leave this school very late, but let me tell you, I will not be ready to teach on Monday. Because the things we had to do are things that ourselves had not anticipated that we'll have to do." Because the most difficult part was reorganizing the curriculum, getting teachers who were not teaching grade 12s to, and just those decisions around the curriculum took the schools a long, long time to come to conclusion. But in terms of your protective clothing, on Thursday they were only delivering the PP, the protective equipment by the province for learners. So which means learners will not have been informed already by Friday. So it's a fact. So I think it answers other questions that I anticipate you will ask. That it's a fact that I can confirm that by the time I went to certain schools, there were schools that were not ready. From Olivenhout Bosch, I went to Midrand Secondary. Again, the principal, the vice principals were having tape measures. Because one thing that we had not thought through properly, DG, we had a schedule on the arrival of teachers and didn't make a schedule on the arrival of other support staff. And you would have expected principals themselves running schools would have closed the gap. So when I went to Ivory Park, it was the principal and the vice principal who was busy doing measuring of distances, whereas they had spent the whole week dealing with curriculum issues. Whereas if we had really planned, the support staff was supposed to have arrived with the principal and all the other administrative work. Even the principal of Ivory Park said to me, Minister, by Monday I'll receive kids, which means I'm going to be inducting learners and teachers at the same time. We are sure we'll be finished by Sunday, but we have not met all the requirements and the steps that we had put for us. I proceeded to go to Kempton Park, and they were beyond what we had asked. They had inducted parents, not only teachers, they had inducted parents, they had orientated their learners, they were ready to move. Everything was in place. But even there, the principal said to me, when my teachers came here, the anxiety in their faces tells me that on Monday we will not be able to teach these learners. We have to really calm them down because it took me time to settle teachers. So I'm just giving an example of our experience to say there were schools which were very ready. There were schools that were not ready. Friday, Free State, they were beyond ready. When one school which I went to, I found them already inducting their learners. Because they themselves also are saying when the teachers arrived, they were very anxious and they felt that if they were to teach on Monday, they must induct their learners. They had called parents, showed them all the health protocols to reassure them about the safety. Because as you remember, we all said everybody's anxious and it's very important for people reassuring each other. So as a result of those reports, as I say, we took a decision to say, let's use this week to mop up. But it's a decision we took very late on Saturday when we had our final report. And there were different views to say, why don't we let the schools that are ready to proceed, because it will kill the momentum if we say they must not proceed, and focus on the schools that were not ready, because some will be ready at different times. I'm giving an example of Ivory Park. The principal said, at least by Tuesday, I'll be ready to teach. The principal of Olive and Holt said, I'll be ready by Wednesday. So which means we're all unready. But the decision was that there were other key factors around safety for the coronavirus which have not been satisfied, like water. Therefore, it will be risky to have a blanket opening of schools. And it took us long on Saturday to arrive at that. So on Sunday, I had to spend the whole day speaking to private schools because they also needed reassurance. We had to agree. I had to speak to. So it was a series of people that we had to consult with. And I'm still explaining why I had to call the media off, because I just could not jump other steps, especially with people who were affected, because principals needed to know. By yesterday, what do? Do they phone parents? Do they send messages to say parents must not bring children? And that's what took long. So I want to say again, I'm very, very sorry. But based on these reports, it became quite clear that the sector was at different levels of readiness. In the main, it was for this reason that CEM, your Council of Education Ministers, determined that the sector requires just more time to mop out the state of readiness for school reopening in order to comply with the health and safety standards of COVID-19. So the Saturday CM resolved that teachers whose schools have already received the personal protective equipment will be expected to report at work on the 1st of June. So we're expecting teachers to come today, and I'm glad the first school I went to, they have a full complement of teachers. They had 25 teachers in their books. They had 25 teachers. But even then, it was qualified that if they have received, because the report was saying as late as Saturday, there are schools which had not received their protective equipment from their provinces. And when they arrive, those teachers have to prioritize the preparation of their work to deal with a new normal brought about by the coronavirus. And that new normal meant different and new tasks for teachers, because even here the principal was telling me that she had 5 classes. You said 2 classes for matric. We have 5. Now you are at 8. So which means teachers were not teaching grade 12, now have to teach grade 12, and therefore you have to work out in terms of your staffing deployment, how do you deploy your teachers? And that was not an easy one, because I think as schools we have this tendency of saying your most experienced or most skills go to grade 12, the others. So we've had to reorganize ourselves. So as provinces, we also agree that we must finalize all outstanding deliveries of your PPEs to schools and the outstanding provision of water and sanitation. Because by Sunday when we met, Randwater gave us a report. They had not finished. I think they'll speak for themselves. There were schools that they had not delivered tankers to. They're only arriving today. And teachers and support staff should be inducted and orientated for the new environment brought by COVID-19. Because it's the very same teachers who have to be armed with all the necessary information, who in return have to support and induct learners. So some of them obviously will not have been inducted by Friday or Saturday. Therefore, we've agreed that schools which have not inducted people, they should do the induction. And again, as I say, when I was in the Free State, it was a health department, there was a doctor and nurses which were teaching our staff about the virus and all sorts of things and working out the protocols of linkages between themselves. And we also agree that provinces should finalize the training of screeners. Because again, screeners were appointed, they had not arrived at schools, but other provinces had done it. I'm told the MEC tells me that she had trained all her screeners, she had trained all her school nutrition members, and also volunteers that had come to assist us. Because what is going to happen in the first weeks, especially in the primary schools, we have to help force our children to understand the new environment. There are going to be different assembly points. They're not going to be able to interact with their friends. They're going to have different breaks. They're going to leave the school at different times. So it's a new environment because they must not be crowded at the same place. So all those logistics have to be sorted out so that come next week, everybody knows where the assembly point is. You see, MC, when I went to the Free State, there were even color coding classes to say the yellow only assemble there. They don't go anywhere else. The green only assemble there. The yellow, so that even inside the school, they are not able to interact, and the whole area has been color-coded in terms of the directions. But we also had to deal with processes related to independent schools, right? So they had made their own submissions to say, we're small. Some of them are small. So the reason for us to phase in is to allow us opportunity to start. It's not because we don't want all the learners here. It's to allow us to really create a COVID-19 compliant environment. And they say, we have, come and inspect us, we have. So we had to deal with those. We also had to deal with schools of learners with special needs. Because even those are different, they're therapeutic, they're a different space that we had to work through. So we did discuss, then we met after our decision with MECs, then we met with teacher unions and the National School Body Associations to share with them our decisions, to use this week to mop up and ensure that all the outstanding matters are attended to, and agreed with them that this week is going to be a mopping period. Schools that have completed all the necessary steps should use this week for induction and orientation. So let me not repeat that. So what is happening now is that provinces are now putting the shoulder to the wheel to ensure that all prerequisites not yet fulfilled will be delivered within the week 1 of June. And together with our partners, agreed to another meeting on Thursday to continue to monitor and evaluate all outstanding compliance imperatives. For instance, we also had situations where, because we announced late our decision on Sunday, parents had started driving their kids to schools. I mean, parents phoned me to say, I'm in the Eastern Cape, my child is in a boarding school. Are you saying I must come back? So we had to deal with all the matters that really were a fallout because of the late decision. So we communicated, unfortunately quite late, that parents should not bring grade 7 and learners 7 and 12 to schools, but teachers who have received their PPEs are expected to report for work and carry out their responsibilities as spelled out. And more importantly, the sector agreed that the effective teaching and learning should resume on the 8th of June 2020. I've decided to also to take the nation to confidence with regards to the situation that we have faced. And that's why I've requested that the CEO of NECT should come to say what is contained in the report that gave us the recommendations to take just another week for postponement. And I think I don't want to speak, to spend lots of time on, because they will speak for themselves. And as I said earlier, I've also invited the Water Board to also assure the nation, because that's one of the key deal breakers, to say, indeed, on Thursday, when we meet, will the water tanks which are outstanding be in all the schools that are there? So, as I said, also based on the reports that I received from provinces, I'm very hopeful that all outstanding challenges they unearth will be addressed during this period so that we can be able to start teaching. Because as I said, in my province, things were only arriving Friday, Saturday, so which means they've arrived. Then they can use this week to induct. Because my view is that any further delays, it's not only my view, and also with my colleagues in provinces, poses a very serious threat to the system and the future of learners that are yearning for. Because it is poor learners who are going to be highly disadvantaged if we keep on postponing. They have not had the benefits, and I'm proud the principal says, she says when she opens next week, she'll be on term 3, because she was able to continue interacting with her learners during the lockdown. But other learners have not had that privilege, so which means they still have to do term 2 work during term 3. And they're expected to write the same exam with learners whose teaching was not interrupted during the lockdown. But the other matter, because as I said, colleagues will speak to the other matters, I thought I should also go through, Chair, the directives that we issued on Saturday. So on May the 29th, which is on Friday, as DBE, we issued a government gazette with directives regarding the reopening of schools and measures that address, prevent, and combat the spread of coronavirus in the basic education sector. And these directives were issued in terms of Regulation 4.3 of the regulations which were developed under the Disaster Management Act of 2002 and was published on 29 April 2020. And the main purpose of these directives is to provide the arrangements for a phased return of educators, officials, learners, and support staff to schools and offices. Number one, in those directives, that in terms of the movement of people between provinces, because we have teachers coming from Eastern Cape teaching in Northern Cape, or teachers from Eastern Cape teaching in Western Cape. So in terms of the movement of people between provinces, metropolitan areas and districts, there will be a permit issued for officials and educators under alert level 3, which means from today, who have to commute to and from work on a daily basis. And these permits will be issued by the heads of department or a delegated official. There will be a certificate issued to learners who have to commute to and from on a daily basis, which will be issued by a principal of a school. For instance, in your area like Parys, where kids study in the Val, again, there must be a permit which is issued And the issuing of the certificate must be done in compliance with the regulations. And even a person transporting a learner to school must also be issued with a permit. So again, the drivers themselves who drive kids up and down to school, they must have a permit. The regulations are also saying all extramural events at schools, including sport, choral estate fort, or choral rehearsals, arts and other cultural festivals remain suspended. And we will talk about, or the minister will determine in conjunction with provinces if there is a need to lift some of these limitations. So a parent, for instance, there's been questions about parents who still feel anxious about sending their kids to school because they're not very sure about their safety. The directives are saying a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school must apply to the head of the Provincial Education Department, who in the terms of the South African School Act can exempt a learner entirely, partially, or conditionally from compulsory attendance, and if such an exemption is in the best interest of the learner. And a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school is obliged to apply for home education. So if your child doesn't have your underlying comorbidities, will fall under the second category because the head of department or the principal has to give an approval. So you can't keep your child at home to say, I'm anxious. And therefore, we find ourselves having to support you. No. If it's reasons that the principal has not accepted, especially mainly around health issues. So a parent who chooses not to send a learner to school is obliged, because basic education is compulsory. So education of children between 6 and 15 is compulsory by law. So it's obliged to apply for home education in terms of the relevant section of the South African School Act. So they must go and familiarize themselves with the conditions of homeschooling and comply, because even then you have to apply. You just can't keep your child home. You have to apply and meet all the conditions that are required under homeschooling. So we have been receiving many inquiries regarding the matric examinations, and it is clear that a lot of anxiety there's lots of anxiety on the matter, and we had to gazette it as well, since it is also an extremely sensitive matter in the basic education system. So we've given directives formally that the May-June 20 examination for candidates who registered for the senior certificate and national certificate is going to be administered in December. So those are your adult learners or your part-time learners. So we had to agree with UMALUS, which is our examining body, that we will only assess those learners in December, unless unforeseen circumstances occur, in which instance I, as the minister, will take the necessary determination. If anything happens, the country says we can't go to work for some reason, we will then have to take a new decision. But for now, the decisions that the learners were supposed to write in June will write in December. As indicated in all previous media briefings, the health and safety of learners, teachers, and all employees within schooling are our major concern. And it is for these reasons that we must ensure that all schools comply with the minimum health and safety requirement and measures determined by health for a school to be able to reopen. And again, there were concerns which were raised by the Human Rights Commission on this matter, MEC, to say, are we saying if schools don't comply, those children will have to suffer and their school is not functioning? The right to education is an inalienable right for all learners. So which means ourselves as a sector will have to find alternatives for those kids to be able to access their rights without being prejudiced by the fact that we are not able to provide conducive conditions. So I thought I should clarify that, because it has been coming repeatedly, that if we really find it impossible, by the time we say there must be learning and teaching, as a sector we have an obligation to find an alternative for those learners so that their rights to education is not compromised. Again, any school or office that does not comply with the minimum health and safety measures, such as schools or offices, will remain closed. I know of some offices in Bulobedi which are in the chief's office, so he gave them a rendezvous, all of them squashing that rendezvous. So obviously we can't operate from there any longer. So we have to find alternatives for those officials, even if it means we send mobile, but they can't operate the way they've been operating. Again, in keeping with the focus on health and safety, the directives clearly state that all offices and schools must develop a work plan. I must say, in the schools that I visited in the country, I did find COVID-19 files. Principal, I hope you have also a COVID-19 file. And we urge all schools to comply in this regard. Parents and guardians must not send their learners to a school if learners show any of the coronavirus symptoms. The screening of symptoms must be conducted at offices or schools according to the Department of Health guidelines. We have since made this available to schools, again those guidelines, and we urge all teachers and relevant officials to familiarize themselves with the health guidelines. And I think that's what you would have observed, that every school, they will set up a station before you get into the main premise to test the temperature, screen, collect information on your age and everything else. So all schools are expected, and even offices are expected on a daily basis to comply to those guidelines. So we agree that we need to work extremely hard to comply in order to prevent the infections, because that's a condition around which Cabinet allowed us to open, to say, when you say you are going back to schools, like everybody else is going back to work, rule number one, you have to prevent infections in your workplace. So which means you have to put every measure in place that there is no infection in the workplace. So there are steps that we have been taken, outlined in the directives to help us prevent the spread of the virus. Every office and school must have easily accessible and sufficient quantities of hand sanitizers based on the number of learners, of educators, officials, or persons who access the offices or school entrances. Offices and schools must have facilities for washing of hands with soap and clean water. The cleaning of surfaces and equipment is mandatory. A mask is a must in every instance. Offices and schools are required to provide a minimum of 2 cloth masks to learners and educators, officials, and support staff. We have observed that schools have been working very hard also to configure the physical environments, from staff rooms to classrooms and the play areas. This is not a matter of choice. All of us must ensure that we comply with the social distancing requirements in order to comply with the health and safety requirements. The major challenge for us as a sector has been around the management of the curriculum and teaching. Since, as of now, we have lost a whole term, because from March to June it's the term, so we've lost a whole term. And we are likely to lose more days due to the virus. And as a sector, we had to be innovative in the manner we get school programs back on track. So in order to recover the teaching and learning time lost, the schooling system has to be re-engineered, resulting in the adjustment of timetables, and that's what most SMTs were engaged with. The review of the curriculum in terms of the education policy, which empowers me as the minister to determine a national policy for a curriculum framework, core syllabuses, and education programs. We had established as DBE a curriculum work stream consisting of curriculum experts from the department and provinces, but we've also been working with academics and curriculum experts in managing this aspect of the re-engineering of the curriculum. So because the basic education directives are not static, we will always use the opportunity to make the necessary amendments as and when required. For instance, when I met the Human Rights Commission, they were concerned about clause 4.2 to say when the directive said a school not ready or not complying to the health requirements will not reopen, we will be prejudicing the rights of learners in that area when it's not their fault that things are not happening for them. And we explained that it meant the school infrastructure, not that learners will not, as the department, will be exempted from ensuring that the rights of those learners are realized. So once we agreed that there was a different interpretation of the clause, they proposed that we should speak to state law advisors, that for the mere fact that different parties have a different interpretation of that clause, it means it's not clear enough, and therefore we need to strengthen, so we'll do that. But there are also issues around that we had not considered earlier about ECD and all sorts of things. So as we proceed under level 3, we will then make the necessary adjustments as we get inputs also from stakeholders, and we'll make those public. So I must say, indeed, the national lockdown has affected our lives in so many levels. Families are traumatized, jobs are lost, and schooling had grinded to a complete halt, and the reopening under the new conditions was a real uphill as compared to other times when we have to count desks, count books, count teachers. Here we had to really create a new environment that we had not worked under before, and it has caused lots of difficulties. But as I said, we were given strict orders by cabinet that schools should not spread the virus. We should make sure that no one is infected in the school premises, and that becomes a priority to everything that we do. And that's what also partly informed the difficulties that we had to encounter over the weekend in determining whether indeed we should send kids to school today when other provinces or schools have not met the requirements, or we should use this week to mop up. At least we know where the challenges are, and we'll be focusing on those. And schools that are ready, like this school, will then do the next step of orientating learners, inducting them and counseling them and preparing them for learning and teaching next week. So Elijah, I thought I should stop there, and if you don't mind, then get the two presenters so that we can then take questions, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much, Minister, for the speech. Before we proceed to the presentation, I would like to also acknowledge the presence of the Executive Mayor of Bujanala District, the district municipality, Mr. Fetsang Molosiwa. I also like to recognize the Mayor of Rustenburg Local Municipality, Mr. Mpho Kno, as well as the of the Education Department in the Northwest, Ms. Defina Simaswe. We also have the Simaswe. That cancer.